during the time we spent visiting places, not to discover anything like the past, but rather to be chastised in the hustle and bustle, when a child approached asking me if I was from India, sadly Damon felt the need to shout and swear at the child. Whenever somebody from a tourist or local background wanted to talk to me, he behaved as if I was owned by him, always ready to command to follow him into another direction, to question me, expecting immediate answers. Any light-hearted moments one might be having with other visitors were considered as stupidity, leading to much-needed chastisement in front of everybody. 2 American ladies, one a practicing psychologist, advised me again discreetly to leave the other and fly back home, or, if I chose to go with them to recover from the observed tyranny I was subjected to on a daily basis, I could stay at their home. It was refreshingly surprising to know that the world was not devoid of real humans. However, the air remained tense all the time, even when we returned to Cairo after our Aswan visit, to take yet another flight into Alexandria with our first tour guides and Ani. We stayed at one of the most luxurious hotel complexes where I have filmed and photographed magnificent sunsets, and for a change I was left alone with one of the guides, Muhammad Makram. For a short while, visiting touristic and historically significant sites, ancient burial chambers, military museums, and war memorials, while Damon remained with his circle of friends, most importantly smoking grass with them. His interrogations were never-ending on a daily basis, and continued well into the late hours of the night. A few days later, we returned to Cairo, staying at Ani's place, visiting his family and doing some horse riding before taking yet another flight on Lufthansa to Frankfurt. I had to put up with a bitterly disappointed, cranky, and bewildered individual. A little while later, we flew to Los Angeles on United American Airlines. Our journey was in first class, during which I was forever interrogated and subjected to extraordinary lengths of first-class corrective advice on how to live. Anything of the gentler kind was considered unacceptable, judging by the feelings experienced and words constantly repeated. I can never forget when we were still on board the Nile Symphony, Damon raising his voice for everybody to hear how disgusted he was with me. Go and buy yourself T-shirts or something from the souvenir shop. You can't walk around like that. It's embarrassing. People stared in our direction. I had only taken the necessary number of shirts for that part of our trip. Was he really and genuinely concerned about my well-being, or did I look poor and therefore unworthy to stand next to his greatness? He was wearing just a few of his T-shirts all the time, and our clothes were often dry-cleaned. He was sweating heavily, perhaps due to his smoking habits, but I had to be the smelly one. He treated me as if I was a young child or imbecilic. I often stood by the window, watching the waves from my berth, when I had any chance to be by myself, but tears kept rolling down my cheeks as I asked why life had to be full of cries. Even at night, when visiting any of the temples with our group, he displayed his anger, asking me, "Why are you doing all this? Videoing, recording, taking pictures. Why? 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 What are you going to do with them?" It was extraordinarily surprising. Was he not encouraging me to take pictures, often using his camera? His eyes glowed red, and his face reminded me of the devil we see in religious works of art. But you are not going to get any dollars with them. I can tell you now. Not from this. Why? Why are you doing it anyway? I'm asking you. Why? Why? It seemed everything had to be equated with money. But, yelled Damon, making everyone stare in our direction, I don't seem to get any answers from you. I again felt that some psychics have done the utmost evil deed, for they all told him that he was a great king in his past. I was, wasn't I? Then he would continue, was my level similar to Ramesses, Serapis, Michael? What was that other asshole again? Archangel or what? On the other hand, whatever he thought of me was anybody's guess, for he was demanding that, thanks to his psychic friends, I predict about the house he wanted to build when we were back in Melbourne. They might have classified me with my looks, hair color, and accent as a great wizard. Assuming that Shirley and I were closely related, Damon believed I would meet her when we were in Los Angeles. That is, if she was not engaged in another film shoot. I probably would, if the circumstances were different, and I was not with him. However, our South American, indeed Peruvian journey was the worst, not due to its rugged mountains, empty deserts, and colorful people, but because of my association with Damon. He could not be anything other than disappointed. Maybe we should have come here first, Professore. This time he was consulting his pendulum, if anybody was telling the truth or not. On top of that, he was convinced that there was somebody in charge of the pendulum he had obtained, and he was certain that a woman from another century was controlling it. Apparently, her name was Marika. What we observed was that the capital, Lima, was a poverty-stricken city, not well maintained. Its buildings were ornamental, but had not been well preserved since their construction in the last century. They were not like the great cities of America or Australia. He could not wait until we went to Cusco, and the accommodation in a luxurious hotel was more acceptable to him. There were a few young girls seeking adventure, but one was his favorite, and he wanted to pay her expenses to come to Australia if I wanted to have her for a girlfriend. How generous of him! When he observed the outskirts of this great city, seeing a number of shanty houses made of tin and other cheap materials, he was full of resentment. Eventually, we took a ride on an old train, turning, twisting, and zigzagging while climbing up to the top of the mountain towards Machu Picchu, but he did not enjoy the adventure. Hearing stories about mudslides made him fear for his life. He had his usual tantrums when we finally arrived at the warm water pools, which are famed for healing properties, and where Shirley had spent some time. It was cold, but those pools provided ever-needed warmth. Whenever we were up there, we also came across a number of students wanting to talk to us, but you can guess what his reactions were like. I would like to think that Damon had some fun, but he bitterly opposed me spending time with a shaman and his family in their souvenir shop. I was keenly interested in discovering more about their Inca culture and beliefs. When visiting a restaurant near the hotel where we were staying, we discovered that the owners, an American gentleman and his Peruvian wife, were very anxious in case the locals did not want any more gringos, as they called them, staying in their country. When we took a bus trip to visit the temple site at Machu Picchu, Damon continued to display his characteristics. telling me to fuck off, and walking towards the altar in the distance, expecting me to follow him. Speechless, I stood there for a short while and then sat in a corner, watching him go down to where others were also walking, and I took several pictures before I went down there on my own. He did not see me, and did not bother. Soon I retraced my steps back to the point where we had first arrived. I could see him walking aimlessly into any direction, but, like a few other people, I gazed upon the sky, seeing a number of UFOs, and 3 of those amazing lights hovered over the area before swooping gently and silently towards the visitors in the temple site. I took photographs of them, while wondering how many people had noticed them. Then, needing to leave the scene, I walked back to catch the bus to return where we were staying. It was a very long wait, and the sun was about to set, but the other tourists were having lots of fun. Finally, Damon emerged from the crowd, his usual characteristics apparent. He said that he was worried in case I had left, was gone, or had committed suicide. I told him what I did was exactly as he requested of me. Did he by any chance hope that I would have committed suicide? Back in Cusco, having answered further questions and taken a bus trip to another part of Peru, passing through desert dunes and some rough terrain, we visited the Nazca Lines. I was keen to meet Maria Reiche, the German researcher who had dedicated her entire life to discovering Inca and the current Peruvian society. But Damon was not interested in anything like that. However, a flight over the Nazca Lines was a delightful experience in a Cessna. During the flight, Damon continually asked me to release the cover over the passenger's seat, for he felt very hot. Co-piloting and, at the same time filming, was not an easy task, while putting up with Damon's fear of heights, which was not at all ideal. Finally, we made our way to Lake Titicaca, visiting the straw islands whereupon people lived, fished with their families and pet pelicans on the blue waters of the lake between Peru and Bolivia. They lived on fish caught daily for all their dietary needs. A leaky boat trip took us to one of the islands, and we were accommodated together with a few other tourists, some of whom were of Israeli background like Damon. Meeting the locals who were ever ready to make our stay pleasurable was remarkable. Little things like small packets of sweets or food items I gave to the children, and taking their photographs was one of my gravest sins as far as my traveling associate was concerned. In this high country, the oxygen levels made it very hard to breathe. It was more rarefied, making it difficult for tourists, especially those with asthma. The natives prescribed coca leaves to chew for those having a problem. At night, we were subjected to wood smoke filling our rooms. I could not sleep, and so spent my time outside, talking to the natives, partially in their native language, Quechua. They had been observing UFOs in the starry skies, considering them as vehicles of the deities. They believed that some white men could be from the skies, bringing famine or blessing upon the land. After their discovery of us as friendly aliens, the natives were ever ready to offer us all they had got, and were very saddened about our imminent departure. On the other hand, whenever Damon noticed glowing insects, and perhaps even other things, emitting light on the ground, he kept kicking and swearing at them. Why in the world did you bring me to this fucking place? Damon was unable to smoke his herbal mixes freely, and so, as he often claimed, it made his life hell. I was very happy when we left the country on American Airlines from Lima, although I would personally love to remain there longer if I had been on my own. I would most certainly help some of the native people with their children's schooling, even their well-being. However, having arrived at Los Angeles Airport, one could not miss how he desperately wanted to catch up with his other friends to fulfill his desire to smoke and be a part of the civilization, telling me that I would be bored with his friends, literally smashing my luggage on the concrete floor. Maybe, as it became customary for him to be physically searched by airport officials, it was the cause of his anxieties. But some of my photographic lenses and filters were damaged after his outrage. After he had hastily got a taxi to wherever in front of the curious onlookers, I collected the pieces together with my luggage, depositing them with the airline for transit to Melbourne. Only then was I able to enjoy some solace in the airport's first-class lounge, and taking the opportunity recorded a few more of my impressions on the equipment I had in my pocket. This is also where I was offered several delightful delicacies by some television personalities who were demonstrating cuisine as they did on the American media. That was a pleasant surprise. I met some extremely rich people from Egypt, Bahrain, Ethiopia, and Britain while waiting for the first available flight back home late at night. While enjoying an interesting conversation with them, my eyes caught a glimpse of an Australian television series on one of the screens. I was so surprised to see Australian films being shown with English subtitles and wondered if they were presented particularly for Americans, as they could not understand Australian. I would have chosen to stay in Los Angeles if I had been able to get in touch with a number of other friends, some of whom were involved in the cinematic art, but it was not to be this time, for many were heavily occupied in film shoots, while others had prior engagements. However, talking to some over the phone made my short visit a little more pleasurable. I had to leave meeting them for another time. A few hours later I took my flight to Wellington, New Zealand. The first-class portion of the plane was empty, making me feel very special for a brief period of time, because I was the only passenger therein. It was an interesting experience, although I normally preferred to fly business class. And yes, I thoroughly enjoyed it without Damon. In fact, as I told Damon very clearly, I needed at least a month and a half to relax. I needed that time just for myself to be able to recover from my ordeal when traveling with him. I could now reminisce on some of my rare moments while observing the sunsets with a number of shamans on the top of mountains in Peru. Raising my arms up to stretch my aching muscles was taken as a gesture to the sun by the locals, who started doing the same, while uttering mantras and prayers to the gods. I heard them shout, "The gods are here," pointing at unusually bright objects, which were most certainly not aeroplanes, military aircraft, or weather balloons, making rather interesting loops and maneuvers, but, as usual, Damon remained seated and kept massaging the sides of his head, looking completely bored with the whole situation, perhaps thinking about why he had come all the way to this place with an idiot like me. However, on board the plane to New Zealand, when unusual and unnatural spots of light were observed, the cabin crew were more willing to talk about them, unlike other occasions. What I understood was that they often noticed them. They were sometimes detected on their radar or onboard equipment, but they were advised not to talk about them. An Armenian girl working as an airline hostess offered me a bottle of wine to take home. She even gave me her American address in case I visited the country again. On arrival at Wellington Airport, I discovered that the city was a little too steamy, yet the weather was still pretty pleasant. I could stay here a little longer, but feeling extremely exhausted, I decided to fly to Sydney after a short adjournment and a few pleasant refreshments. I was the happiest man in the world after arriving in Melbourne, looking forward to having a break from all that nonsense I was subjected to. When journeying, my imaginings, dreams, or associations with other dimensions, although the situation might have been thought as being a psychological trauma I suffered, were not because I am convinced that they were thought transferences from another source impossible to pinpoint. They were certainly from an unknown reality. More importantly, they were real to me. They could have been due to my imaginative creation of stories in thought, but not as pretense, or wanting to gain attention, or admiration of others, for I never seek worshippers or followers. However, those experiences in the astral provided me with that ever-needed solace and some satisfaction in my yearning to know things. They were so beneficial during the times when I was not allowed to do anything else other than answering unrelated, illogical questions of no value. I felt that every moment of my life was stolen away, while I was expected to satisfy the mind of somebody considering himself as the only chosen, therefore having the right to own me just the way he was towards his other associates, friends, and family. I desperately needed to have a complete separation from him